Oh, hello. Hello. Man, it got quiet. Hello, everybody. I didn't even say anything and it got quiet. Wow. We're going to start here in about 5 minutes. I'll let a few more people trickle in. And David is going around and he's giving out raffle tickets. So make sure you get one of those. We're doing a book raffle, not a book, but 5 book raffle before the end of the night. So make sure you get a raffle ticket. And we've got popcorn and water, some refreshments in the back. So help yourself to that, please. And then I'll say this on the front end and not again, but the Beacon is supported by donations from people like yourself. So if you are so inclined, we've got
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Beacon Resource Center. My name is Andrew Gates. I am one of the pastors at Riverside Church that meets here at the Beacon and sort of co-founded the Beacon back a dozen years or so ago. And one of the things that drew me to South Bend and drew me to this position here in this city was the fact that this community, this side of the city, and this resource center is so committed to returning citizens, and the work that the Beacon has been doing for the several years that I've been here with job fairs and with Locked in Solidarity, this being the 8th Locked in Solidarity that we've hosted in this building. It's just a breath of fresh air and a beautiful way to embody the good news of God and be kind and loving in our community. And so we thank you all for coming here today, and I want to send it over to my brother Jeff, who is the executive director of the Beacon Resource Center, who you probably all already know.
Thank you. You didn't take 3 minutes. No. Thank you, guys. He had 3 minutes, but he left me an extra minute and a half. So yeah, welcome. I'm Jeff Walker, as Andrew said, and thank you for being here. Such a great turnout. This is a phenomenal thing that we get to do every year. This is our 8th annual Locked in Solidarity. Show of hands, who was the first time here at this event? Wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much. And in the next show of hands, how many of you have either presented, been on a panel, have spoken? Can you raise your hand? Come on, Judge. Yep, I see you. All right, thank you, guys. Deb, thank you so much. So before we get started, I just want to do a quick history of Locked in Solidarity and how we came to be where we are today. So Locked in Solidarity began in 2014 as a justice initiative of the Christian Community Development Association, or CCDA. And that initiative sets out to bring awareness to the issues of mass incarceration. The Beacon partnered with this national organization and first hosted Locked in Solidarity locally in South Bend in 2017. So what does it mean to bring awareness to issues of mass incarceration? There are many, but in short, more than 5.6 million Americans were in prison, jail, under probation or parole when counted in the year 2020. 95% of those 5.6 million sent to prison in America will one day walk out those gates and return to their communities, to our community. At the Beacon Resource Center, we seek to continue efforts to help the formerly incarcerated and to do our part to try to change this societal narrative of who they are. Once a criminal, always a criminal, right? Convict, felon. Returning citizen is the language that we prefer to use. So that's why these last 3 years or so, we focused on returning citizens. Over those years, this event has welcomed many local voices, practitioners to share their work in this space within the South Bend community. We have introduced organizations such as the Dukem Center, the South Bend Community Reentry Center. Come on. Yeah. Yeah. We've introduced organizations such as Dukem, South Bend Reentry, and Imani Unidad, Deb Stanley, just to name a few. You have heard from both men and women who once were previously incarcerated share first-person stories of their hardships reintegrating into our community, as well as their triumphs of overcoming many barriers. Not only becoming successful contributors to our community, but also by exceeding the odds and becoming supervisors, managers, and professionals. Our returning citizens are fathers, mothers, husbands, and wives. They are homeowners and business owners. Ladies and gentlemen, people from South Bend who go to prison and come out again aren't different than us. They aren't even just like us. They are us. If you were at Studebaker Talk, this is the second time you heard that. Okay, so LIS, Locked in Solidarity 2024, our theme this year, the national theme this year is restorative justice. And so it was a really good opportunity for us to join in on this national effort because there is a lot of stuff happening locally on that conversation. So Without further ado, we're going to get started. Our first speaker tonight, Blake Raber, the Thomas J. and Robert T. Ross Associate Professor of Philosophy. Blake is an epistemologist. I messed it up. I practiced that several times. Epistemologist at the University of Notre Dame. I'm serious. I practiced that like all day today. His work focuses on issues in epistemology that shed light on fake news, political polarization, and related phenomena. Blake is also an avid cyclist, so welcome, Blake Raber.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Thank you all for coming. It is extremely encouraging to see you all here. So I'm going to talk about something called epistemic reparations, and I'm going to explain how epistemic reparations kind of figure into restorative justice. So first thing I'm going to do is basically talk about some people, and after I talk about those people, I'm going to basically get into the notion of epistemic reparations themselves. So let's see, can we get the slide up there? Okay, so there's a sort of a movement that kind of goes behind this label, epistemic reparations, and ground zero for this movement is basically Northwestern University, something called the Buffett Institute. And within the Buffett Institute, there's something called the Epistemic Reparations Global Working Group. That is probably not legible for people at the back of the room, so I'll just go ahead and read it to everybody. It says, the working group aims to create a more holistic, survivor and victim-centered framework for understanding reparations that includes the recognition of the right to be known for those who've experienced gross human rights violations. Now, you can't talk about epistemic reparations without talking about a particular person named Jennifer Lackey. So she is the person who coined the term epistemic reparations. She's a professor at Northwestern University. She's the founder and director of Northwestern University's prison education program. And I want to mention that real quick because I think a lot of people in the room will probably be interested in that. So this is a program where Northwestern University professors teach college courses inside the Cook County prison system. And just this past semester, they had their first graduating class of Cook County inmates. So these people are able to take a full Northwestern undergraduate education inside the prison and are now Northwestern graduates. So this is not like some sort of like special degree just for them. This is a straight up Northwestern degree. So these people are now Northwestern graduates in exactly the same way as these kids who walk off campus every spring are Northwestern graduates. So they're graduating from one of the best universities in the world while in prison in the Cook County prison system. So this is one of the things that Jennifer Lackey has done, and she's also the main person who works on this stuff called epistemic reparations. Okay, so those are the people. So now I want to explain what on earth this, sort of jargony term is supposed to mean. In this context, it's probably good to just start with the notion of reparations, and I think just kind of like the generic dictionary definition is a good place to start. So reparations, just in the most general sense, are successful attempts at fixing things. That's all reparations are, right? So, the world is broken in all kinds of ways, right? Your toaster might be broken, your leg might be broken, your relationships might be broken, you might be broken, spiritually or psychologically. Anything that can be broken can potentially be fixed, and any successful attempt at fixing something is a reparation, right? So that's what's meant by reparations in this context. Now, the word epistemic is the hard part. So epistemology is the thing that I work on, and it's sometimes characterized as the theory of knowledge. So epistemologists spend a lot of time wondering, what is knowledge? What is it possible to know? How do human beings acquire knowledge? What's the extent of our possible knowledge? What makes knowledge valuable? And so on and so forth. Epistemology kind of starts with this background concern with the question, what should we believe, right? So the whole discipline of epistemology kind of starts with this recognition that the world can be this kind of confusing place. So think about all the disagreement there is in the world. Disagreement about religions, right? So think of all the different things people believe about God. Think of all the different things people believe about people and about God's relationship to people, right? Different religions make different claims. One religion wants you to believe one thing about God. Another religion wants you to believe something else. Like a political disagreement, right? Disagreement over climate change, gun control, taxes, vaccine requirements. Even things like nutrition, right? So like, suppose you get curious about whether avocados are good for you. Go home tonight and Google this, right? Within a half hour, you're going to find one person who looks like they should be an expert saying, yeah, avocados are good for you. And you're going to find someone else who looks like they should be an expert saying, no, avocados are not good for you. So epistemology starts with this recognition that the world can be this really confusing place, and it's not always clear what we ought to believe. And epistemology tries to shed light on that question. Now, there are at least two things that are completely non-controversial within epistemology. The first one is that false beliefs are bad and true beliefs are good, right? Don't believe false stuff, do believe true stuff, right? That's taken completely for granted. Second one is ignorance is bad and knowledge is good. So it's not a good thing to be ignorant about some important thing in the world, and it is a good thing to have knowledge of that important thing in the world, right? Taken completely for granted. Well, if false beliefs and ignorance are bad, then one way the world can be broken or amiss or not as it should be is for people to have false beliefs or to be ignorant about some important thing. And then one way to fix the world is to replace those false beliefs or that ignorance with truth and knowledge. And that's all epistemic reparations are. They're just successful attempts at replacing false belief and ignorance with true belief and knowledge about important things that are happening in the world. Now, when you look at the people who are working on epistemic reparations, there's a particular sort of focus or emphasis that they tend to have. And we can kind of get a good feel for this with some examples that are common in this literature. So one example is the example of a person named Jim Fogel. So Fogel was convicted of the rape and murder of a 15-year-old girl, sentenced to life in prison for this. After 32 years in prison, DNA evidence proved that he had not committed this crime. So here he is, he's been released from prison, and there's this discussion with him about, he's suffered this terrible injustice, right? And there's this discussion about, okay, how can the state, various other people, sort of kind of repair this situation for him? You can imagine all variety of attempts to make the world better for him in material ways, right? Give him a lot of money or do whatever. Well, one of the things that Fogel said afterwards was that whatever material things may have been done for him, it was extremely important to him that people knew that he had not raped anybody, that he had not murdered anybody, and that he had suffered for 32 years in prison for something he had not done. He needed people to know that, right? And specifically, he needed, the jury and the judge and the people involved in his conviction to know that that was a mistake. I think this is extremely easy to understand. I mean, imagine that you're accused of some terrible thing and people don't know that you didn't do it. I think we all can really easily grasp the importance of people knowing the truth about these sorts of things, right? Another similar sort of example is a person named Baba Sikwaperi, who was he was abused by an apartheid-era police officer in South Africa for many, many years. One point he was shot in the face, and this didn't kill him, but it did result in his being permanently blinded and suffering really severe medical complications for a long time afterwards. And the South Africa Truth and Reconciliation Commission gave him an opportunity to tell his story. So he's able to go before a bunch of media personalities, top government officials, people like that, and recount his suffering at the hands of this police officer. And I want to read to you what he said after he was able to tell his story. He says, "I feel that what has been making me sick all this time is the fact that I couldn't tell my story. But now it feels like I have my sight back by coming here and telling you this story." So again, it's this acknowledgement, like whatever material reparations you might be able to make, if the story isn't told, if people don't know what's happened, then the world has not been made right. It's really important to have the truth out there and known, right? Here's the way Jennifer Lackey kind of sums this up. She says, "Victims and their communities need to be made whole, not just materially, legally, politically, psychologically, and morally, but epistemically as well. They need to be told the truth. They need to know what happened, and they need to have an accurate history documented and remembered, not only for themselves, but for future generations." So it's not visible at all probably back there, but the little yellow square up there is a flyer from an event that Jennifer Lackey and the Buffett Institute put on last year. So this was up in Winnipeg, Canada. It's a really nice example of epistemic reparations in action. What they did was they gave Inuit people, First Nations people, and others an opportunity to stand before government personnel, media people, and so on and so forth, and basically tell what the Canadian government had done to their people over the years. And then this was entered into official Canadian record as part of the official history of Canada. So that's what the kind of people working on epistemic reparations are up to, right? So that's the notion of epistemic reparations. That's what the people working on epistemic reparations are doing. Okay, so how do epistemic reparations then relate to restorative justice? Well, if you take a look at the Restorative Justice Handbook, you're going to see really early on in the handbook that restorative justice has three core elements, what the handbook calls the encounter, the repair, and the transformation. And here's the way that the handbook describes the encounter. So this very first element, it says, encounters are designed to be safe spaces that foster vulnerability and sharing of facts and truth. They're emotional, a place where people can share freely without fear of being judged. Participants are respected, listen carefully, and seek to understand. Encounters elicit truth. Offenders take responsibility for wrongdoing. Victims share their truth, and the process vindicates them. That's epistemic reparations right there. Like right at the core of the restorative justice movement is this thing these other people are calling epistemic reparations, right? So that little bit of vocabulary doesn't appear anywhere in the handbook, but the idea is front and center. And I think it's really kind of neat that these two different groups have kind of zeroed in on this same really important, really crucial thing. Now, you can probably kind of get a flavor of this from the examples I gave. The epistemic reparations group tends to focus more on human rights issues and big social justice sorts of things. But I think these two different groups of people are really kind of zeroed in on the same important thing. So my 15 minutes, basically what I wanted to do was just make everyone aware of this thing called epistemic reparations and the good people not too far from our community over mostly in Chicago, but other places working on epistemic reparations. So I really appreciate you all coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Blake. Blake and I are really good friends. We bike ride together. We even do races together. We started at the same time, but he finishes way earlier than I do. He's showered and eating, and I'm still struggling to get to the finish line. So thanks, Blake. Next up, I've got two wonderful people from the Student Policy Network at Notre Dame, Adam Aiken and Zoe Jensen. So come on up, y'all. They're going to talk about a project that they were working on based on the expungement process that Judge Gamage and Ken Connor, our prosecutor, did back in 2020. We got some data from the clerk's office, and they did a little research on that, so they're going to tell us all about that.
Testing. Okay, so it is really close to your mouth. Hey guys, I'm Adam. I'm a sophomore at the University of Notre Dame, majoring in political science and global affairs with a minor in theology, originally from Northwest Indiana.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm from Carmel, Indiana, so we're both fellow Indiana residents here, and I'm a senior studying political science with a minor in the Hesburgh program of public service.
Awesome, yeah, so like Jeff outlined, we're here to just do a little 10-minute debrief on a project we conducted with the Notre Dame Student Policy Network last semester, titled the Life Outside Reentry Project, affectionately known as LORP. So our intro is going to be mostly just going over what this project is, and we're going to go into some of the data we collected and what that means for expungement in Indiana, and also some research we did, both cross-comparing Indiana policy to other states, as well as how to improve internal policy relating to expungement. So we had a unique two-pronged approach like we just outlined in this project. Firstly, we had 4 people on our data team. They focused on analyzing the records that were unsealed by the judge that was just aforementioned, and surveying those people, trying to understand how their expungement policy worked, what were their complaints, what were the good things about it, and how expungement had affected their lives. So we will present some data on that. And then we also had a research element where, like I said, we documented how Indiana expungement policy compares to neighboring states, so Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, Illinois, what the current political, social, and just law state on expungement overall is in Indiana. And finally, we prescribed some policies, both based on existing laws and new ones, about how we can improve expungement in Indiana for everybody.
So as Adam mentioned, our two-pronged approach included two sub-teams. So the way the Student Policy Network works is we have two project leads, which are ourselves, and then we select mostly underclassmen members to be on our team who are interested in the project as well. Within that section, I guess, they divide themselves into a research collection and comparative analysis with other states and their expungement laws, and then the data analysis, which, as Jeff mentioned, we worked with the Beacon's expungement clinic records, and from there we got 217 Indiana residents' contact information to then contact them and ask them a brief survey about their experience with expungement. So our team members did do this. They called and reached out to, or emailed or texted if they couldn't get in contact with them via phone, all 217 of these people. And our yield response was a 20% yield response rate. We envisioned it to be a little bit better than this, but that's still 43 out of 217 contacted. Within this, we asked 3 separate questions to the respondents. We said, how has your experience, or has your expungement process been a positive experience? Is your expungement still pending? And how has this process and opportunity changed your life, if it has? We had an overwhelmingly positive response rate from those that did contact us. Our negative experiences were very minimal, and they mentioned mainly that it was negative because they had their expungement was still pending or denied based on, larger systemic issues like socioeconomic insecurity, lack of trust in the system, and stigma of criminal records. So then I'll move on to the research portion and how we kind of tied those together.
Yeah, so given the data we collected from surveying these 217 Indiana residents, we then move forward with the research portion. So given what we learned from them, we could then prescribe policies based on what we learned. So firstly, we wanted to get into what are the current laws in the books and what is the current political state of expungement in Indiana. Not shockingly, there has not been a lot of movement in the legal status of expungement. Basically, there has been no significant legislation passed to change expungement law, to tweak it, to expedite it, anything like that for the past 5 years. It's mostly just stayed where it is, especially in 2020. There were some pending bills that were then tabled given COVID-19 took precedence. So expungement is basically at a moot point in Indiana. However, there was one bill we found interesting. Senate Bill 88 in Indiana is on the table that will increase expungement eligibility for wrongful convictions. There's also Senate Bill 34, which is about amendments to marijuana and addiction-related legislation. And then finally, pending amendments based on misdemeanor convictions. So there's a little bit of movement that's happening right now, but overall, we concluded the political state of expungement may have some momentum, but overall, it's not moving too fast. Which is why we then moved into comparing with other states. So first started with Michigan. Not surprisingly, Michigan has a much more lenient expungement policy than Indiana. One thing we found very interesting was they have clean slate legislation, which both expands eligibility to almost everybody who's committed a misdemeanor and has laws in the books that prevent discrimination in expungement. So we found that interesting. Illinois was another case study that was very interesting. Illinois was by far the most lenient one we studied. Illinois had a lot of amazing programs, many of which the Beacons advocated for, things like entrepreneurship programs, education within prisons, programs designed to prepare people to come out of prison with skills that can then be applied into the workforce, and also like deferment programs based on employment. So Illinois was another case that a lot more lax, and consequently we concluded a lot more efficient expungement. People are getting their records expunged faster, they're having better experiences, and they're integrating to society much better than here in Indiana. So that was Illinois as we looked at that. Moving to Kentucky. Kentucky was kind of the opposite of Illinois. Their expungement is not automatic. It is completely in the hands of the prosecutor. So Indiana may have some improvements over one state. It's Kentucky. It's just it's a lot more rigid of a process. And when we analyzed the data coming out of the Kentucky state houses, we were noticing that not only people not having the records expunged, those who were going through that process often reported negative experiences, saying that it took longer than it had to. And even when they did have the records expunged, they still had issues with getting those then sealed, or people were still somehow having hold of their records, which is the whole point of expungement. So Kentucky not doing so hot. And then finally was Ohio, our last case study that we cross-compared. Ohio and Indiana were shockingly similar. Originally, the laws in the books were exactly the same, which was kind of interesting. One thing that Ohio does have pending, though, is Senate Bill 288, which creates a key legal distinction between expungement and sealing records. So then if Senate Bill 288 passes in Ohio, both the government and the public could never access these records. That is something you don't have in Indiana. In Indiana, if your record's expunged, it's not accessible to the public, but the government can still get a hold of those. So Ohio definitely has something going there that we thought was interesting to note for our research. So all of this, analyzing the current state of the books, pending bills, and cross-state comparisons, led us to come up with the following policy prescriptions. Overall, bird's eye view, we would say, expungement in Indiana needs to have its barriers reduced, its process streamlined, and take other models and accept them. Indiana has a lot of flaws in its system, and if we look to north to Michigan or look to Illinois, there's a lot of potential in those states to then emulate what they are doing. So first of all, we want to adopt Illinois' programs. Their entrepreneurship programs, their prison education programs, and their deference based on employment programs are huge. This is giving people who have had their records or have pending records to be expunged an opportunity to integrate into society a lot smoother than we have in Indiana. And just beyond that, it is then reducing stigma around crimes. Like Zoe noted, when we were surveying these people, a lot of the stigma that was, obviously prevailing was they don't want to talk about this. They've had the records expunged. They moved past it. They are no longer interested in discussing it. However, in Illinois, when reading editorials from the state, people are a lot more willing to talk about their experiences because they felt supported by the government and coming out of what they endured. And in that way, they're able to reintegrate into society, not as criminals, like Jeff noted, but as one of us. So that is something we definitely think we should adopt. Moving forward, we want to adopt Senate Bill 288 or something similar to that in Ohio. It is very important for the scope of this project and for expungement overall in Indiana that people have their records completely sealed. There was a bit of hostility in our surveying when people were like, well, how did you get these records? How do you still have access to these? And while it was important for our individual project, we do understand that for many people, when they want their records expunged, they want it gone forever. They want that just completely erased. And expungement, sadly, is not the solution to that. It's sealing records. So if you're able to pass a bill similar to that, you can then expunge records and consequently seal them, which will actually give people a truly clean slate. Beyond that, we want to adopt the pending legislations in Indiana, so Senate Bill 88 and 34, that focus on reducing barriers for addiction-related convictions as well as convictions that were wrongful, which seems pretty self-obvious, and pass the amendments that relate to adjudication. So again, just back to the idea of reducing barriers, making it easier for more people to get their records expunged. Finally, reduce waiting times. For example, if you committed a class 5 to 6 felony that was then reduced to a misdemeanor, you have to wait 5 years to even be eligible for expungement. That's just waiting. That doesn't even take into account the timeline of the actual process. That's 5 years to even apply. And again, if you had your conviction reduced to a misdemeanor, it seems pretty self-obvious you would want to have that expedited, but you can't. So reduce waiting times and then expand qualifications. Particularly, Indiana has some relatively draconian laws pertaining to juveniles and marijuana convictions. Those are two areas that, especially given the sort of federal push to decriminalize, legalize marijuana and also help out the juvenile detention system, we saw it fit that we prescribe policy that would be aimed at helping those people get the records expunged much more easily, because it would seem obtuse to continue to have those laws in 2024.
So I wanted to close off with a few testimonials that we got from some of the respondents, because we recorded some of their individual responses, exactly what they said, on the line, and how they felt positively about the expungement process and the clinic that the Beacon provided. One said, "I have a wider opportunity for jobs and housing." Another said, "It makes things less complicated when I want to apply for a job." Another, "I went from having 4 felonies and 15 misdemeanors to nothing. My life is now on track." And then finally, "As soon as it went through, I went and got my CNA license to make my kids' lives better." So we really want to thank Jeff and the Beacon Resource Center for partnering with us and allowing us to learn more about Indiana's critical expungement laws, especially as Indiana residents. We were not incredibly educated on the topic before. So thank you, and thanks for allowing our team members to grow in knowledge and community involvement here in South Bend, as well as students, and promote justice, especially restorative justice. So thank you guys so much for listening to us today.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, guys. So there is a handout, a one-pager back there. There's a few copies on that tall table of that covers everything they just shared. And then there's a QR code back there as well. If you want to find the full report, you can take a picture of that QR code, and they give you that. And then we introduced Life Outside a couple of years ago. There's also a one-pager back there of some other re-entry data that has been gathered over the last year as well. And speaking of House bills and policies and such, Maureen Bauer, our Indiana State rep, is in the house. Thank you for being here. Judge Gamage is in the house. Mayor Mueller is in the house. Rachel Tomas Morgan, our councilwoman at large, is in the house. So we are thankful for the support that we have from our public officials, state officials as well. And thank you. Thank you, guys. To be involved in this space, Judge Gamage is super supportive, is partnering with us on doing the expungement clinic here, providing the data so these fine students can do this research on that. So we got a long way to go, but it's great to have our foot in the water, right, and starting the process. So with that said, video.
More than half of victims of violent crime don't even call the police in the first place. They prefer nothing to everything we have to offer. The vast majority of crime survivors' pain goes unhealed. What the existence of restorative justice means is that we can no longer pretend we don't know what else to do. As a country, we're really good at punishment. It's passive, it doesn't require people to act, to think, it certainly doesn't require them to change. When we lock people up, we excuse them from their responsibility to answer for what they've done. Restorative justice is a process to hold them accountable. It's a tool. People take turns answering questions like what happened, what needs arise, whose responsibility is it to meet those needs, and how is that person going to do it? It requires someone to take responsibility, to repair things as much as possible, and to never commit that harm again. This isn't about feeling sorry, it's about doing sorry. Things like go to school, get a job, pay restitution, apologize, do community service. Restorative justice practices have been used to address low-level infractions like vandalism, up to addressing the impact of murders on the surviving family members. Restorative justice processes are first and foremost about meeting the needs of people who are hurt. Sometimes the person who can make the greatest contribution to a survivor's healing is the person who harmed them. To come through trauma, we need answers to our questions. To say, my life was never the same after you hurt me like that. Crime survivors want the most safety possibly available. So if incarceration actually produced safety, we would have the safest country in human history. That's not what we have. The core drivers of violence are shame, isolation, an inability to meet one's economic needs, and exposure to violence. And we bake those into prisons to try and keep people from committing further violence. Incarceration exposes people to exactly the things that increase the likelihood that they'll go on to harm others. People who are hurt deserve a process that will help them heal. People who are responsible for crime have an obligation to be accountable for that. All of us deserve responses to crime that actually make us safer. Our current criminal justice system doesn't deliver any of those, and restorative justice at its best delivers them all.
Okay. So next up, we're going to talk about restorative justice. And hopefully the next several speakers will help communicate what that short video tried there. But two more things. Todd Cummings, he left, but our superintendent of schools was also here. And then Sharon McBride said that she's watching online. She's also one of our Common Council women as well. So great support. Next up, Ellen Williams is a restorative justice practitioner and trainer, having been a trained keeper for well over a decade. Other work has involved conflict resolution, education, serving incarcerated youth and adults, community conversations, and consulting on matters of restorative and social justice. A former family law attorney, she turned to social service administration and higher education, finding a fit in the restorative justice framework. Along with her is Michael Williams. He's a circle keeper, trained in repair of harm, and serves the restorative justice community in multiple ways. Michael is the recovery coordinator at Paramount School of Excellence, a charter school here in South Bend, where he works with students to overcome behaviors that may interfere with their best learning experience. Michael holds a degree in business from Holy Cross College. Ellen and her husband Michael reside in South Bend and direct a nonprofit called Take Heart Incorporated that focuses on restorative and mentoring approaches for highly at-risk youth. Take Heart provides mentorship to these young people by training formerly incarcerated adults in conflict resolution and restorative justice. Let's welcome Michael and Ellen Williams.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming today. So, again, my name is Mike Williams, and I am co-founder of Take Heart Incorporated. And we began by 6 or 7 years ago when I was in college doing research on some of the things that impacted underserved communities. I looked at some of the causations of that. One of those were systems that were perpetuating disadvantage, trauma in our communities, lack of opportunity and access. So then when I looked at those things, I kind of thought back what I needed during that time when I was a teenager coming up, and it's the same now. Positive role models, access to programs, access to services. So what we did with creating Take Heart is we wanted to create opportunity. We wanted to give purpose. We wanted to be able to help restore the community. So how could we do that? By one, creating opportunity for returning citizens who then give back to the youth who are traveling that school to prison pipeline and try and reduce that by giving back, by sharing their lived experiences.
What's funny about, is this functioning? What's funny about the research that Michael referred to that he was doing 6-7 years ago is that last year, when we started reading research findings from the Department of Justice and from the Office of Juvenile Justice Prevention Programs, they started talking about how you need what they call credible messenger mentoring. How the necessity of working with kids who have been involved with the system, who have been suspended, expelled, locked up, kicked out of foster care, etc., is best done by people who have similar lived experiences. And they created this label, credible messenger mentoring. And we read that, and we looked at each other and said, well, it's about time. Guess they figured out what we knew back then. Because that's what we were already doing. That was what we created when we decided to start Take Heart. We knew there was special sauce in a couple different ways, and one was that credible messenger piece. That quite frankly, somebody like me is not the best mentor for a young man of color who's come through the system, grew up in what you might dub the bad side of town, the bad side of the tracks, all of that. They look at me and like, lady, what the hell are you going to say? Quite frankly, and you know that. But when the mentors in our program sit down with them, they listen. And that's a big part of our secret sauce. The other part of our secret sauce is the subject of the moment, which is the use of restorative practices. We don't sit down and preach at them. Nobody does. We sit down in a restorative justice circle, and we use the restorative justice practices in order to do what RJ does best. RJ is a different lens to look at this world. It builds relationships. It helps create trust. It doesn't put you on the spot. And even though it's going to work with you to figure out how to repair harm you've caused, it's not going to do it by making you feel bad, and it's not going to come at it from a punitive approach. So those are the two pieces of our secret sauce. The use of restorative practices in what we do, and using credible messengers as our mentors. because they've been down the very path that the kids we work with have been down, and they know where it lands. They know what kind of cells it ends up with. They know how many birthdays and holidays and everything else that they missed because they went down that path. And they have something to say about that. So that's what we are doing right now. We have been doing it now for pushing 4 years. It'll be 4 years this year since we started doing what we do. And we've been able to expand and grow and work with different kids in different parts of South Bend. There may be a way for us to grow even further, and I want Michael to, because he knows I can talk and talk and talk. It's like once you get me started, you have to shut me up. So I'm going to try to shut myself up for a minute and talk a little bit more about what kids we work with right now and our expanded services as we're going into this year.
Okay, so currently, we are currently working with Safe Passage. We're working with the kids at Woodford Homes. We're going in there every other week. We go into Safe Passage at the JJC every week, working with the youth there. And the thing about restorative justice that is so great is that it's twofold. It's not even just for the ones that we're mentoring, but it's also for the mentor, because in that capacity, it's building relationship. We're building each other. We're learning from each other. We're growing. So restorative justice has a way of not only restoring the returning citizens, but also restoring the youth, changing the trajectory of their path in life. And that's what we want to do. That's what our work is about. That's what we continue to strive to do. But we also want to create purpose and that sense of accomplishment and that sense of giving back for the returning citizens who work with us.
To be really specific, we are at Safe Passage, part of the JJC, and Jenny is interning there right now, and she's in our circles as well. We are there every Tuesday, like clockwork. Michael's at Riley High School every Tuesday, like clockwork. I'll point at Kristen wherever she is. We are at Woodford Home, which is a residential facility for teenage males and young adult men who are there. We have been there every other Saturday since we started. They were the first place that said, yes, please, come work with these kids who've been through the system and don't have somewhere else to be other than here. And the component that works with our mentors is that every Wednesday evening we have a circle for them and any other adult who's been impacted by the prison system. Because finding that community of others who've been through what you've been through and doing that work on you that you really need to do and able to be a good mentor, that's what we do on Wednesday nights. We get together, and sometimes I'm leading the circle, but I really need to just shut up because everybody else has that lived experience that they need to share and learn from each other with, and that makes everybody a better mentor. And just now, we are taking referrals for youth from juvenile probation and some other sources as well for circles in the evening on Tuesdays. So that's a great process where we're providing our mentoring, where we're providing some circles with families and some college and career readiness services as well. So we have some brochures in the back, some business cards. We're happy to talk to you. If you're going, yeah, I have some kids I want to send to you, please talk to us. We'll do that, and we'll have that conversation, because these are often kids who our system is ready to vilify and kick out at the ripe old age of 14, 15, 16 years old. Because one of the things that is sort of a thread to every one of these locked-in solidarities that we've attended is that there's a prejudice in this country that is alive and well. It's not okay to say you're racially prejudiced. You might be, but it's not okay to say that. You might have a lot of prejudices that are no longer okay to say. You're not supposed to act like you have them. The prejudices against the formerly incarcerated, it's okay to say you have them. I meet people who will come up to me and explain to me why they are right to hold those prejudices. I try to be, civil, but it's what people will puff up their chests and tell you. It's definitely what some politicians I have met will puff up their chest and tell you, that they are absolutely right to keep formerly incarcerated people from living in certain areas, from holding certain jobs, from being able to volunteer in certain places, to come to their kids' schools, all kinds of different things. And I've had our mentors say, that's why, I'm trying to stick to time, sir. But that's what they hear all the time. So we help our mentors deal with life the way it is. And then we help the kids not have to deal with that. Because if we can help you get turned around, then you don't have to worry about living with one more prejudice in your life. So I know there's a Q&A session toward the end. We'll happily answer any questions, and we will let you return to your normal programming.
Thank you, Michael and Ellen. Yeah, Michael's been around, 4 years now? Yeah. Yeah, he was one of those shared persons, first story experiences several years ago. If you came in late, raise your hand, because we have raffle tickets. I want to make that announcement again. So, David, can you try to see who those people might be? But at least make sure you get one before we do the raffle at the end of the night. Okay. Also, popcorn, snacks, water is in the back. Feel free to help yourself. Next up, we have the Restorative Justice Collaborative Hub. Delilah Horta, did I get that right? Is the Executive Director of the Restorative Justice Collaborative Hub, a local nonprofit offering education, accompaniment, and advocacy services to advance community-based accountability. In addition to her work as a restorative justice facilitator and trainer, she has worked with youth and the wider community as an educator and equity consultant since relocating to South Bend a decade ago. So if you would, please welcome Delilah.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Jeff, and everybody here for the years of work that you have done and dedicated to address the impact of mass incarceration. As we have heard today, and as you probably well know, we know that the systems we have inherited are not designed to focus on healing or meaningful accountability, right? They're just not designed for that. They are focused on punishment. And we know the unjust impact of mass incarceration, otherwise we would not have to have events like this today. We know that a system that's focused on punishment instead of a path for meaningful accountability will continue to result in the cycles of harm and injustice that we witness every day. We saw that in the video narrated by Danielle Sered. Highly recommend her book, Until We Reckoned. If you haven't read it, please do. And we also know that survivors of crime are further marginalized and often ignored in a system that focuses on punishment of the responsible party instead of the needs of the person harmed. I was really glad to hear the epistemic reparations process, because that's what that focuses on, right? That survivor-centric model of ensuring that we understand the impact that survivors have experienced. So we know all of this, and we know that there has to be a better way. Over time as a society, we have handed over our ability and our responsibility to respond to harm to higher authorities and unaffected third parties, right? We have a peer of jurors who aren't supposed to have any type of experience with the harm that they are deciding over. When a crime happens, we report it to someone else. When there's an issue at work, we report it to HR. When there's a problem in the classroom, where do we send the students? To the principal's office. Even at home, when there are issues among siblings, we call the parent and have them fix it for us. We routinely say, this is not my responsibility, let someone else handle it. This is how our society operates every day. Or, on the other hand, when we do decide to take matters into our own hands, we often resort to violence and retribution, because that's the only other model we know. Because that's the way that we have been taught, conditioned to think that that is how we gain respect. If something happens to me, I have to defend my honor, I have to defend the dignity of my family, and we think that violence is the answer. But there is something inherently wrong with responding to harm and violence with further harm and violence, right? If we believe that these actions are intolerable in our communities when they're used against us, why do we accept these actions in our responses to harms caused by others, right? Why do we bake violence into our prison system if we are trying to send a message that violence isn't okay? That doesn't make sense. Our systems, our norms, our actions, all of this reflect the values that we hold as a society. And so we must ask ourselves, do we wish to continue to deny our responsibility to one another, or do we wish to seek another way? At the Restorative Justice Collaborative Hub, we're a fairly new nonprofit here, although we've been spending several years trying to launch this and get this off the ground. We see the inherent interconnection between us all. We know that when harm happens to someone, it doesn't only impact one individual. The impact of that harm, of crime, ripples throughout the community. And in responding to that harm, we know that we should respond in ways that affirm our values and that should restore and create community safety for all, not just a few individuals, but for all, the entire community. We challenge the assumption that justice equals punishment, and I think that we have seen that over and over again, right? Justice does not equal punishment, and punishment does not lead to justice. So we seek to reclaim ancient paths to meaningful, dignity-centered accountability that repair the damage done by harm and that meet the needs created by it. This means that responses to harm should and must center the justice needs of those most impacted by harm. That includes the people who have suffered the harm, the people who have caused the harm, the rest of the people that may have been impacted by the harm, whether that's family, right, friends, and the whole community, the community as a whole. In this framework, accountability is not seen as punishment imposed on others in response to a behavior that we deem as wrong, but instead it is carried out as a process by which community members, and that means all of us, every single person in our community, we are tasked with addressing the effects of harm in order to repair the harm done and to prevent the recurrence of harm, thus restoring community safety and trust. Restorative justice, then, is more than just a tool or a diversion program. I'm sure you may have heard about diversion programs that exist, and there's a place in our society for that. But restorative justice has to be more than just that, because we know that anything that exists within an unjust system is probably going to be unjust as well, right? So we need to have something more than something that just tries to minimize the harm enacted by our current systems. Restorative justice is a community-wide commitment to center the needs resulting from harm and responding in a way that honors the dignity of all. Restorative justice asks each and every one of us to consider, in the wake of harm, after harm happens, how do we as a community respond? And what are our obligations to one another? And again, this is whether we are directly impacted by harm or indirectly impacted by harm. As a Restorative Justice Collaborative Hub, we are offering 3 distinct ways to support this community-wide commitment: education, accompaniment, and advocacy. Later this spring and through the summer, we will launch our revamped educational series on reframing accountability. This is building on years of work our current members have dedicated to providing workshops in schools and in the community at large. We are offering immersive workshops to explore the value of accountability from this relational perspective, to find out how restorative justice shifts power dynamics and centers dignity, and to help us start using accountability practices that leave people feeling more whole and capable. We have more information about our workshops at our table in the back as well, and on our website as well. We are also preparing to offer survivor-centered support for people directly and indirectly impacted by criminalized harm. Over the past years, as we laid the foundation for this organization, we have met with various community organizations and advocates who are already working directly with survivors of harm. And like we heard earlier, time and time again, it became clear that what survivors want and yearn for the most is to not have to endure the re-traumatization and re-victimization inflicted upon them through our conventional systems. What they want and what they deserve is accompaniment. They deserve to have their voices heard, for the impact of the harm that they experience to be known, and autonomy preserved, right? They want to be in charge of how their harm is going to be resolved and healed. And we simply do not have systems that allow that, right? Our justice system, our so-called justice system, is focused on the person who has caused the harm, right? The survivor of the crime is not a part of that process at all, other than some interviews occasionally. So our approach is to assist people as they discern, those survivors of crime, discern what they need and to work with them in designing processes to meet those needs. We don't come with a prepackaged answer to their needs, right? We want to make sure that they decide what it is that they need. Sometimes that's a face-to-face encounter with the person that has caused harm. Oftentimes it's not, right? There are surrogacy models where sometimes they want to meet with somebody else who has caused a similar harm. Sometimes they just want to write it down. Oftentimes they just want to be heard. They want somebody to ask them, what did this do to you? What has been the impact? And to have somebody sit with them, to accompany them, to witness that pain and suffering. Sometimes that is justice enough. But our job is to be with them, to witness that with them, to accompany them in that process, and to design something that will lead to that recovery. This approach does not demand reconciliation or forgiveness. That's often a misconception about restorative justice, right? And we've heard lots of stories where it's like, oh, you know, here's what is sometimes known as the offender and victim, which are terms that we do not use because obviously we're labeling people. But oftentimes we hear these stories, right, of two people, one person who has caused harm, one person who has received the harm. They come together and they become BFFs after, right? Sometimes that happens. Oftentimes it doesn't. A true restorative justice process ensures that whatever that need is followed through, right? There are answers to that need. Sometimes that means, I just need you to know the impact it had on my life, and now I need us to go our separate ways. That, to me, is safety. So this approach does not demand reconciliation or forgiveness, and it does not require people to meet face-to-face because, as I mentioned, sometimes that's not safe, sometimes that's not needed, and sometimes that's just not desired. That's okay. Instead, our approach is led by survivors themselves to ensure that any path to accountability is centered on the needs resulting from that harm. So we're focusing on the harm and what needs to happen to repair that harm. So we envision a robust, survivor-centered network of support in our community where recover matters to all. We believe that a society's response to crime or other types of harm should accomplish three things. One, to support those harmed, as I just mentioned, holding them safe from further harm and looking after the needs created by that harm. And another is to create a pathway for meaningful accountability and amends when somebody causes harm. And we know that we don't have that, right? We saw that in the video, we've heard stories. Punishment does not equal accountability, right? There's no way, there's no supportive path to repair the harm that somebody has caused. And we all cause harm, right? To some extent or another throughout our lives, we will cause harm to other people. What happens after we cause harm? Are we allowed to take ownership of our harm? Are we allowed to make amends? And we believe that that pathway to making amends should be supportive and not punitive or harmful. And equally important is the commitment to remove or transform the conditions that made harm possible or likely, which leads us to our third area of focus, which is advocacy. We know that shifting how we view accountability is not possible without real investment and transformation of the structures and policy that currently exist. So we are therefore committed to working towards the incorporation of policies and procedures throughout institutions, organizations, the state, nationally, that support ways of meeting people's justice needs. and we encourage investments and structures that make restorative justice possible throughout our community. So that means money, right? We need money to be able to do this. We all need money, right? We want to make sure that restorative justice is stable, sustainable, and accessible to everyone. And finally, we named our organization the Restorative Justice Collaborative Hub because collaboration is a key value for us. It is crucial that any justice process is co-designed and co-owned by those most affected, right? We should not be the ones leading or telling people what they need, but it needs to be co-owned by the people most affected. And we also recognize, as we've heard today and throughout the years, there are so many organizations in South Bend, in our region, already doing similar work, related work, right? We know that we all can work together to provide that robust system of support. So we will continue to partner with organizations like Mamas Against Violence, Imani Unidad, the Family Justice Center, for example, who we've interviewed over the past year, to make sure that we're not just replicating services that are already available, competing for funding, things like that, but really working in partnership with others doing related work. I have a really good artist, activist friend who makes these beautiful quilts to show the history of lynching. The really powerful, LaShonda Crowstorm, by the way, you should look her up too. And one of her friends asked her, like, why don't you make quilts about something else, right? There's like all of these other justice issues. And she replied, that's not my slice of the pie, right? Because we all have a slice of the pie. And this is what our slice of the pie is, this survivor-centric framework of restorative justice. And we know that there are so many other organizations here working on these other slices of pie. And if we work together, if we collaborate, we have a whole pie. Right? There's enough resources. We don't operate out of the scarcity mindset. There are enough resources to support and to create the supportive network here in South Bend. And that's what we aim to do. So restorative justice is an invitation for everyone, every single person here. If you leave with something today, it's this, that we need to own our responsibility to address harm in our community. We at the Hub are working to decrease the long-term cost of unmet justice needs and to increase our community's capacity for safety and justice. And we invite every single one here to join us in making accountability safer, fairer, and more transformative for all.
So you'd think the last place the victim of a crime would want to visit is a prison, but turns out it actually helps many of them heal. It's a program helping inmates see how their actions really affect people. Here's Jason Whiteley with this WFAA original.
Yeah, we're not bad men. We've made bad choices. But
the stories you hear in prison can sometimes make you shudder.
You know, I'm an alcoholic. I've been an alcoholic for a while. I should have known that if I made that choice to drink, that it could bring me to prison.
At the Estes unit in Venus, Texas, some of the most compelling accounts aren't always from inmates.
Yesterday was 3 years that we buried our son. So it was a tough day.
But rather crime victims, like Susan Polson.
I can't go past a Walgreens without seeing my son lying there with a sheet, and all I see is his feet, and no one will let me go near him.
Somebody got shot.
3 years ago, her son TJ tried to intervene when a 22-year-old man opened fire on his wife at this Walgreens in Arlington. That suspect, though, then turned his gun on TJ, a good Samaritan, killing him.
One of the things I told them, I don't want their sympathy. That's not what I needed. I don't need their sympathy. I don't want their tears. I just wanted them to listen.
She really touched me.
Rashad Allen is one of the inmates in a program called Bridges to Life.
I had a friend drag me, and literally he was like, this is a good program. And I was like, well, not another program. But I took the initiative and got started. And once I got started, it was full steam ahead.
This isn't a prison ministry or teaching a trade. Instead, 10 offenders meet with 2 volunteers, a couple of hours each week for 3 months, not to lecture, but to listen.
It gives you an understanding of what they went through. And not only that, it just gives you more empathy in your life to and sympathize with them.
I am a crime victim myself. Unfortunately, my mom was murdered and my dad was the offender.
Jim Buffington runs Bridges to Life.
We're trying to get the offenders to to answer the questions on accountability or responsibility or forgiveness or reconciliation.
Recidivism is one way to measure results. On average in Texas, 22% of inmates return to prison after they're released. But those who go through Bridges to Life have a better chance of staying out of trouble. The recidivism rate for this program is 14%.
You know, I was able to express what we've been through as a family, what I've been through as a mom, you know, to these inmates, because they need to understand what they've done to somebody. There is a victim.
Prison was the last place Susan Polson expected to find some peace, sharing a painful story that helped her heal and inmates understand. In Dallas, I'm Jason Whiteley.
Bridges to Life is based in Texas, but it has expanded to 13 states and 6 countries. The program just graduated its 46,000th inmate. So you'd think the last place the victim of a crime would want to visit is a prison,
So you
but
may be
turns
asking,
out
why is he showing a video of Bridges to Life in Texas? Before I tell you, table, Delilah mentioned the table back there for the RJ Hub. Also, MHAM, Mental Health Awareness of Michiana, has a table back there as well. Part of what MHAM does is offer pro bono counseling services. Phenomenal organization. So go back there, see what they do. If you know anybody who might need some mental health screening or something like that, I believe they might have a card with a QR code on it that you can take a screening and decide if you need further mental health assistance. So the story behind the video, it's related to our next speaker. So many of you know, and many of you don't, because we have a lot of new people in here today. So my oldest son is in prison in Texas. He is in his 14-plus years of incarceration, anticipating no parole here in a few months. So it's been 8 years me sharing this with you guys, and maybe next year he's going to come and be our guest speaker. But in January of 2020, my son was taking the Bridges to Life program, and he and I talked every Sunday, and he called week after week, and he would tell me about this program and the things that they talk about, and it was just transforming his life along with the other men that were taking this program. And this one particular week, he told me in that class that they watched this video of a lady named Misty Wallace who shared her story. And he was like, Dad, it was so awesome, and this and this and this, and I won't give it all away. I'll let Misty tell you the rest of it. But I was intrigued because one thing that we started to do in 2020 was try to build relationship with the South Bend Community Reentry Center. Lisa Stewart was there at the time, and she's moved on. But I reached out to Bridges to Life in Texas. They told me that Misty Wallace was our Indiana representative or something like that. And we were going to talk on how can we implement that program at the Reentry Center. Well, do you guys know what happened in 2020? Anybody remember? So this was February. I looked back on emails trying to find her before this event. And it was February of 2020 where this relationship was built. And a phenomenal lady in my life says often, you can't make this stuff up. And so Marianne says that all the time. You can't make this up, that God 4 years ago created this opportunity for me to meet Misty Wallace. And then here 4 years later, we're having a conversation on restorative justice. And I tried very, very, very hard to find her. She had left Bridges, didn't have her email. My friend Justin McDevitt, who kind of can pull a rabbit out of a hat, was able to locate her. And so I'm going to stop talking because you guys want to hear from Misty. So Misty Wallace was a victim of a violent crime. Misty faced many challenges as she lived for years in bitterness, hate, fear, heartache, anxiety, and depression. Through her journey, God has shown Misty to forgive. Forgiveness has allowed her to heal physically, mentally, and emotionally, which has encouraged her to share her story and give back to others. South Bend, please welcome all the way from Indianapolis, Misty Wallace.
Good evening, everyone. Man, I'm sitting in my chair and I'm listening to the Notre Dame, and where's Delilah? I'm listening to you, and I'm so angry, and I'm mad, and I'm frustrated. 13 years I've been sharing my story in the state of Indiana, and we're still in the same spot we were 13 years ago with restorative justice. It's sad. All we have to do is open the book to Texas criminal justice system, and there you go. We'll have restorative justice in the state of Indiana. Start to finish. It's very simple. I don't know why it's so hard. It's so frustrating. But I'm here to share my story anyways. I am a victim of a violent crime. My journey started October 18th, 1992. I was a senior in high school, full ride scholarship to play softball. I was out with my friends that night, haunted housing on the southwest side of Indianapolis. And my boyfriend and I had gotten into an argument, so we parted ways. I dropped him off at home. I dropped him off, drove up to the local strip mall area there where it was all lit up, pulled into a Burger King restaurant, got out to use a payphone, because believe it or not, we did not have cell phones in 1992. I pulled in to use the payphone. My intent was to call home and let my mom and dad know that I wasn't going home. I was going over to my friend's house. My mom and dad didn't answer the phone. They were already sleeping. So I called my boyfriend, who I was mad at, and I said, hey, I'm going over to my friend's house. Don't call and wake my mom and dad up, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. But in the meantime, I noticed that a car had pulled around to the front of the Burger King. A gentleman, like in the front parking spot next to the door, a gentleman had exited the passenger side of the vehicle. He walked towards the back end of my car, and he said, how long are you going to be? And my boyfriend on the phone said, who's that? I said, someone wants to use the payphone. I hung up the phone. I turned around. He took a gun and stuck it to my head and pulled the trigger. The bullet went through my left cheek, down through my esophagus, severed my carotid artery, bounced up through my throat, and broke the top 2 vertebrae in my neck. My body automatically went into shock. My head landed underneath the back tire of my vehicle, well, the front tire of my vehicle, but the back of the tire. As I'm laying on the ground, my ears were ringing and burning, and I was in and out of consciousness, but I was watching. I could see him get into my car. I left my keys in the ignition. A few seconds later, as I'm laying underneath my vehicle going, please God, don't let this car start, I could not get out from underneath my tire. My body was in shock, and I couldn't move my body at all. At that time, I was face down. I noticed that he had exited the car, and when he was started to walk away, I said, please help me. And he left me there to die. He left. A few seconds later, a gentleman that was on a night shift coming home from work had seen my body laying on the ground as he drove by, pulled in, started helping me, called 911. At that point, I had got myself rolled over on my back, so at this point, I'm choking and gurgling in my own blood. He rolled me over on my side. He told me he called 911. He started putting pressure on my face, and the ambulance came. They put me in a shock suit. My body was going into shock really bad. I remember needles going into my chest, into my legs. They take me into the hospital. They get me prepared for surgery. They notice that they shoot dye into my thigh and find out that the bullet's still in the back of my neck. It had an exit in my body, and that the carotid artery was severed in my throat, neck area, and that my brain was starting to swell. So they had to get me into surgery very quickly. I go into surgery. I wake up on life support. I continued life support for 3 days. Day 4, they weaned me off life support. I went into a regular room till day 7. Day 7, I left the hospital. I went home to a very long recovery. I lost my scholarship to play softball. The bullet stayed in my neck for 2 years. At home, I did graduate and walk with my graduating class that year. I had to learn how to speak. I had to learn how to chew. I had to learn how to move all my facial muscles again. I was at home healing. I'd been home about a month into my recovery. Excuse me. My dad was a truck driver, and he had come home. He had just been back to work after a month, and he had done a full week, and he came home. He said, "Hey, I need to run to your grandpa's for a little bit. Do you want to ride with me?" And I was like, "Sure. I can get out of the house. I've been in the house for a month." Granted, I have a bullet sticking out the back of my neck, big old neck brace, staples from the back of my ear all the way down to my throat. But I was ready to get out. I was very active in sports. We got in the car. We drove to my grandfather's house, but we got in my car, which he had just gotten back from impound, and they took it over to get it repaired because the starter went out on my car that night, and it had to be towed from the crime scene. My dad put a new starter in it, and he asked me if it was okay if we drove it to my grandfather's. I said, yeah. We went to his house. We're almost there. We come to the intersection of Vermont and Lyndhurst in Indianapolis. We're sitting at a stoplight, and I'm the passenger in my car. My dad's driving. And I look at my dad, and I said, there's the car. He said, what? I said, that's the car that pulled into the Burger King that night. He said, where? I said, right there across the street from us at the stoplight. And I said, but the guy driving it's the guy that shot me. And so we pulled in. We followed him. My dad followed him. He went into the gas station up the street, got out, went in and got a drink, came back out. I got his license plate number, which matched the description of the car that I'd already given the police and the detective. We followed him. He turned left. We went right. We went down to my grandpa's house where we were headed. I called my detective, and I said, hey, I now have a license plate for you. I just ran into the car that pulled into the Burger King that night. I said, but this time the guy driving it was the guy that shot me. And he said, okay, well, I'm out of state. They're expediting someone back from another state on other charges. He said, but I'll be there in the morning. I'm just going to drive through the night. And he goes, I'll be there in the morning. Stay put. Stay at home with your family. And I'll have a detective watching him until I get there. So he came in the next morning. He went to his house. He knocked on the door. His mom answered the door. The detective goes in and questions him. You know, did you do this? Do you know this girl? Were you in touch with her? No. Deny. So they had enough evidence that they ended up taking him downtown to the Marion County building, downtown Indianapolis. They booked him for attempted murder, carrying a handgun in the state of Indiana without a license, auto theft, and robbery. And he denied it. It's not me. I didn't do this. I went on. I was healing. Like I said, I graduated with my class. I shortly after graduation, I married. I moved out to California. I was living out there, 2,000 miles away from home. So I went from all this in 1 year happening to me. I get out to California, and I start having post-traumatic stress syndrome, panic attacks. I was in the ER nightly. I felt like my body was shutting down. I felt like I was having a heart attack. It got so bad that they sent me to a psychologist out in San Diego, and they sent me, they ended up giving my husband, who was in the United States Navy, an honorable discharge for my mental health. I needed to come back to Indiana and be around my family and friends. I needed to heal, start recovering, and get back to Indiana with family and friends. I start going to support groups and counseling and just being with family and start dealing with depression. And I had, I always tell people I was incarcerated for, mentally for 17 years. I get back to Indiana, living life, had children, and I get that letter from the Department of Corrections that says my offender is being released. I was mad. I didn't understand how he could get 20 years. He got the minimum. He gets a 20-year sentence. Went to Pendleton. Started serving his time. 8 years and 8 months. This is exactly how much time he spent behind the wall. I was angry. I was scared. There was a whole level, a new level of fear. Because he didn't know me. I didn't know him. I now have kids. Now I have to protect them. There was still someone else in the car that night. You know, I always had to look over my shoulder my entire life. I felt like somebody was going to finish me off. I felt like somebody was constantly after me. It's horrible to live that way. I was so angry, and I went through so much depression, and I got to a point to where I didn't want to be here anymore. I went through a divorce. I was just so mentally drained that I wanted to give up. And I almost did. And the same guy that was by my side on October 18th, 1992, is a gentleman who was leaving Allison's that night, leaving a shift that he wasn't even supposed to be working. He's 83 years old today, and he's still my friend. I call him my angel. That night that I wanted to give up, he came to me, he sat with me, he talked to me. He told me how selfish I was being, that I now had kids, and that we were going to get through this together. I've come so far. But I'm still angry, and I'm still dealing with the frustration and the bitterness and the hate. And then we start going to church. And I swear, every time I walked in that door, they said forgiveness. I was like, that is never happening. Ever. But forgiveness, forgiveness, forgiveness. And finally, I started learning about forgiveness. And on my journey, my forgiveness is, I don't ever have to forget what happened to me, but it's how I choose to handle my days left in this world. It's how I choose to live my life. I was mentally incarcerated for 17 years. He was physically incarcerated for 8 years and 8 months. So I took it a step farther, and I reached out to him. I did, as a victim, because the system wasn't going to help me. I tried. I reached out to him because I had questions. My message to him was, I am no longer angry. I am no longer mad. I choose to forgive you. But I do have some questions. And he called me. He called me, and he let me share what he put me through. He listened to what I had to say. I didn't have to beat him up. I didn't have to shoot him. I didn't have to do that. I just wanted him to hear what he did to me, what he took from me. So at this time, I'm going to call up my shooter, who is here with us today. He's actually a chaplain in the Indiana Department of Corrections for the last 13 years. Currently the chaplain at Plainfield Correctional Facility in Plainfield, Indiana, Keith Blackburn.
What kind of monster will do what you all have heard this evening that I did? What kind of monster would walk into a parking lot and shoot an innocent woman in the face trying to steal a car? Where did a monster like that grow up? Did he have a mom, dad? These are questions that we wonder. I grew up in a home, west side of Indianapolis, typical inner city neighborhood. I grew up with a mom and a dad who loved me very much. But at 13 years old, I rebelled against all my moral upbringing and everything that I knew was right, and I began to take things which wasn't mine. I began to steal, 13 years old, to get money, to buy things I wanted, greed. I began stealing bicycles, selling them, going to the mall, cutting school. I was stealing gold chains, would sell them, stealing hood ornaments off cars, anything we could do to make money, stealing car radios, climbing into windows in houses, stealing video game systems, TVs, VCRs, whatever I could do to make money to get things that I wanted. 14, I thought I was tough, joined a little neighborhood gang. 15 years old, I got my first gun, started carrying it, took it to school, took it everywhere with me, began fighting more. 16 years old, took my first drink of alcohol, became more violent, found my drug of choice, which was alcohol and LSD, and was real dark in my life at this time. I was dressing in all black. I was sleeping all day, staying up all night, staying out, wasn't coming home, dropped out of school. Halloween of my 16th year, I got a black cat. I felt a black cat represented evil and everything bad, so I got this black cat out of the neighborhood. I took it down to the park with a candle, and I took a knife, and I cut my arm, and I slit the cat's throat. And I made a blood covenant with Satan, telling the devil I was going to serve him for the rest of my life. Called myself the boogeyman. 17 years old, I remember kind of like you wake up from a dream and trying to piece it back together. I remember being 17 from what my friends had told me, stories that they had told me, and I tried to piece together. 18 years old, 1 week after my 18th birthday, we was out robbing and stealing, and we was going to go rob a store. And I had a knee injury, and I could walk, but I couldn't run. And we went to rob this store, and I got out, walked into the store to rob it, and I remembered I couldn't run to get back to the getaway car because I had a bad knee. So I bought a pack of Big Red bubble gum and left the store without robbing it, walked back to my car, told my partner we need to get a car so I can just drive it up into the parking lot, do the robbery, and then we'll go spend the money. Well, we started driving around looking for a car, and you heard the story. We found one at a Burger King restaurant at a payphone. I saw Misty. I didn't know her. I walked up to the back of the car, looked in. The keys was in the ignition. I looked at her, and she had looked at me. I asked her, how long are you going to be? But in my mind, this is a witness, and we're standing at a phone, so if I let her live, she'll be able to call the police before we could even go do the robbery. So I pulled a gun out of my pocket. I put it to her head. I did what I could never take back. I pulled the trigger. And before her body fell, I was already around to get in the car to steal it. I didn't know what you know. I didn't know her head was underneath the wheel of the car. I tried to start it. It didn't do anything. No noise, no nothing. I didn't know what you know. She was under the car praying, please don't let this car start. I'm a car thief. I'm there to steal the car, so I checked the gears. Everything seemed to be in working order. Tried a third time to start the car. It didn't do anything. Realizing I wasn't going to get the car, I seen her purse was in the passenger seat, so I took her purse. And as I was leaving the parking lot, I heard her from under the car. I heard her say, help me. Help me. I walked away. I didn't think about her. I didn't know if she lived. I didn't know if she died. I didn't watch the news. I didn't look at the newspaper. I just went on with my life like nothing had happened. I had knee surgery 1 week after the shooting. Home recovering from knee surgery. I'd been home about a month. I was thirsty. Wanted to go to the gas station to get a Pepsi. Hadn't been out of the house pretty much for a month. If anybody was looking for my car, figured they'd given up by this point. Figured I'd got away with the crime. Got my change off the mantle, got my keys, took my crutches, went to my car. The first light I came to out of my apartment complex, I was face to face with the woman I'd shot a month earlier. I didn't know. I didn't know that she'd follow me. I didn't know she'd got my license plate. But the next morning, detectives were at my house asking me questions. I said, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. You got the wrong person. You're wasting your time here. You need to get out there and find out whoever did it. If I hear something, they didn't believe my lies. They took me downtown, charged me with attempted murder, carrying a handgun, robbery, and attempt auto theft. I went to trial. I was found guilty. I didn't get found guilty for everything, but I was found guilty for attempted murder and carrying a handgun, went to Pendleton. And I went behind the wall at 18 years old, still living wrong, still practicing Satanism, still doing wrong in prison. And I'd been in prison about 3 years, and I was getting ready to turn 21. And my mother, anybody got praying mothers or are a praying mother? My mother never gave up on me, continued to pray for me in the middle of everything I was going through. She continued to pray for me. And she had called the radio station and requested a song. And she told me, she said, hey, on your birthday, I want you to listen to this country station. I dedicated a song. I said, Mom, I listen to rap. I don't want to listen to country. She said, just listen this one time to this song. I want you to hear it. And I put my headphones on, sit down on my bunk, 331J in Pendleton, Indiana, in my cell. And the announcer said, this song goes out to Keith, who's in Pendleton. God loves you and your mama tried. And played a song by Merle Haggard called Mama Tried. I'd never heard this song before. And I heard my life coming through this song. In spite my Sunday learning to the bad, I kept on turning. No one could steer me right, but Mama tried. Her pleading I denied. There's no one left to blame because Mama tried. Second verse come in, said turn 20, or the chorus said turn 21 in prison. This is my life. Second verse come in, poor old Dad, rest his soul, left Mom a heavy load. My dad passed when I was 17 in the midst of my addictions. And here I was hearing this in the song, and I knew when that song went over, something needed to change, and it was perfect timing. An officer came by my cell and knew it was my birthday. He said, man, you're 21 in prison. Don't you wish you could go to the bars? I says, sir, I am sick of bars. And I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I wanted to change my life. I didn't know how. I got out of my cell that night for dinner. I talked to a guy down the range. He was about 30 years old. I called him old school. And I told him I needed to change. And he said, youngster, if you really want to change, you need to change your nouns. I was like, dude, I slept through English. I dropped out of school. I don't even know what a noun. Anybody? What's a noun? Anybody? Yeah. He said, change the people you were with, the places you were going, and the things you were doing. I said, man, you done lost your mind. I'm in this place. I'm with you people. And we doing these things. We were still doing criminal things, still stealing, still getting high, still doing drugs, still not thinking about the stuff we're going to do when we get out. He said, I said, man, I'm in. How can I change? I'm in prison. He said, people in prison change every day. That might have been the only thing in that whole cell block. People in prison change every day. I said, what do I need to do? He said, you're in the cell house. Go to the dorm. I said, why would I want to do that? I got my own cell. I got my own fan, my own hot pot, my own space. I don't have to share anything with anybody. Why would I want to go? He said, hey, you said you wanted to change. If you go to the dorm, you'll be in a new place. When you get to that new place, there's going to be new people there. When you get there with them new people, you can choose to do new things. I said, man, this is crazy enough. This might work. So I put a request into my counselor, and 1 month later, I packed up and moved to the dorm. I didn't know what God had in store. He put me in a bed next to a Christian. And I knew he was a Christian because a table that we had to share had the biggest Bible I'd ever seen in my life. The table we were supposed to share had a lexicon on it. The table we were supposed to share had a Vine's Expository Dictionary and a Strong's. And if you know anything about this, some big books. Take it up. So I said, when he got off of work, I said, he said, have you read this book? Well, it's a Bible. Of course I've read the Bible. Everybody's read the Bible. I've read it front to back. I was still lying. He said, what do you think about this book? Well, I think it's in my way. And we argued for the next 3 months over that book. He told me about Jesus, told me about the blood, told me about faith, told me about forgiveness, all this stuff. I realized 3 months into our argument, I was no longer arguing with him. I was arguing with God. My lies and God's truth collided, and God won. I had to take responsibility for what I'd done. I said, I'm guilty. I'm guilty. It's me. I did it. I pulled the trigger. I shot the woman at the phone booth. It was me. I'm in prison for what I'd done. I need to tell my mom. I already told God. I told the brother that was witnessing to me, but I need to tell Mom. How do you tell Mom? This is going to break my mom's heart. I sent her a Mother's Day card in 1996, said, Mom, I am guilty. You talk about being so light and so free. I was free inside of prison, never been so free in my life. Free to tell the truth, free to make better choices, free to serve the Lord, free to grow in this newfound faith I had. And my mom, she wouldn't, she was a truth-telling woman, God-fearing, wouldn't lie, but she would tell one lie over and over. They say, Lou, how's Keith doing? How's your son? She would look him right in the eye and say, oh, Keith, he's just fine. He's away at school. And I said, Mom, I'm not at school. I'm in prison. She said, you better learn something while you're there. I said, yes, ma'am. So first thing I did is I enrolled myself at the feet of Jesus as a disciple of Christ, began to grow, learned what them books were, and started studying, learned to pray. Got my GED, enrolled in Ball State University classes that was offered at the prison, got my associate's degree. Working towards my bachelor degree, I got released from prison. 2001, I'm home. Still had to do the same thing I learned in prison, change my noun. So I didn't go, even though I paroled to my old neighborhood, I didn't hang out with my old friends. I went to new places, which were church, hung out with new people, which were people in ministry. We did new things, which was nursing home ministry, jail. We got into jails and all this. So everything's going great. Life's going good. Got a family, got my wife back here. Been married 21 years now. Got 4 kids, 2 grandchildren, just living life. Started volunteering with jails and prisons, got the opportunity to be a chaplain. That's what my goal was in Christ, my ministry. And I asked me, what do I need to do? I'd got my bachelor's degree. I said, what do I need to do to be a chaplain? They said, well, you need to get an MDiv. And I was like, an M what? They said, a Master's of Divinity. So I found Indiana Wesleyan, started towards my Master's of Divinity. I was in class in Marion, Indiana, when I got a Facebook message from Misty. My whole body, she said, I have forgiven you. She had forgiven me for what I'd done. God had forgiven me, but now my forgiveness has a face, and it's beautiful. She did what nobody would expect her to do. I called her, and she told me the story you heard tonight. I learned what my crime had done, what my bullet had done, what I was responsible for. I didn't know the starter of her car went out. I didn't know Tim Williams saved her life. I didn't know anything that had happened. I didn't know my bullet was in her body for 2.5 years. I didn't know when I robbed her that night of her purse. I took her safety, her sense of peace. I robbed her of a college education. I took her scholarship away from her, and here I was, a high school dropout who went to prison and got college educated in prison, but my victim, because of me, lost her opportunity. I learned all of the panic, everything you heard, the depression. I learned about her almost taking her own life because of me. And I began to take even more responsibility. She could have forgave me and walked away and never had a conversation again. That was perfectly okay. But she chose to not only forgive me, but to walk alongside and share this story. And we started telling this story at Indiana Wesleyan, and then we started sharing this story in prison with Bridges to Life. It's how we got involved with Bridges to Life. And then, so ever since 2012, we've been sharing this story all over, and we've been blessed. But a friendship never should have come out of a thing like this, but we are now friends. We travel. We've been able to travel. We've been to New York twice. We've been to California twice. We've been to Canada. We've been all over the nation. We've been blessed to write a book. They're working on putting the book into a movie. There's such great things that happen, but peace has been restored. Restorative justice is what we live. When we first started telling this story, it was like our 4th time ever talking. We went to Toledo University, flew a little airplane. Don't recommend that. 4-seater plane. We went to Toledo University, and we talked to a room full, this was in 2013, to a room full of restorative justice practitioners and professors. And the one professor stood up at the end and said, "You are the epitome of our field." And that scared me. First of all, I didn't know what an epitome was. And how can I be, once I found out what epitome was, how could we be the top or an ideal of a field I had never heard of? So I read Changing Lenses, learned about Howard Zehr, learned and I started studying, and then we started practicing Bridges to Life, and it's just been an awesome, awesome journey, and we get awesome opportunities to share our story in environments like this. And we just want to thank you for the work you're doing in restorative justice. Thank you for this Beacon Resource Center. Thank you for the invite, and just continue, be encouraged. What you are doing matters. What you are doing matters.
Wow. So I watched the video after my son told me about this. So I knew, and I was kind of trying to keep it quiet, that Keith was also going to be here. That's why you only saw Misty Wallace, because I couldn't share the other side of this impactful story. Can I keep y'all a little bit longer? Is that okay? 6:15-ish, 6:20-ish? Okay, because there's some other stuff that we need to get done. And it would help if I had my pad to know what that is. Hey, Brother Gil. Okay, so we're going to do a Q&A, but we're going to cut it short because I don't want to keep you too long. We're all about, getting people out of here on time and respecting everybody's, busyness. So we're going to do some Q&A. So I got some microphones, and if you've got questions for any one of our presenters or Misty and Keith, let us know. And I apologize, we can't get everybody, but if anybody has a question, let's do it. Dev's like, okay.
So it's just a quickie, but okay, it's just a quickie.
Here, Dev.
Blake. Okay, this one works. Okay, Blake. It was in regards to those three things that you mentioned, and the first one was encounter, and then there were the other two. Okay, give him a mic because I can't hear him.
So the second one was repair, the third one was transformation.
Repair and transformation.
Yeah.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you. That's all.
You're welcome. This is all from so there's like a handbook that's like extremely informative. It's just Google restorative justice, and one of the first things that comes up is just like this PDF it's awesome. Let's see, I don't remember the name of so if you just Google restorative justice, you're going to get a website that just says restorative justice on it, and then there's like a PDF right there.
Send me the link. I'll send it to Deb. Yeah. Yep, that's right. Anybody else? Anybody else? No.
My name is Beth North, and I'm on the board of directors for this League of Women Voters of the South Bend area. And I wondered, by a show of hands, how many of you are registered voters? Thank you. And by a show of hands, how many of you are members of the League of Women Voters? I'm inviting you to become a member of the League of Women Voters. We help people get registered to vote. We help inform people about what they're voting, including some of those state bills that you've heard mentioned. And we help people get to the polls. So please join us. You don't have to be a woman.
That's right. Thank you, Beth. Yeah, we're going to be sending some stuff to Maureen so she can present it. Marla, did you have? Yeah. Anybody else? Come on, Bob Middle.
This gentleman here, you talked about doing things just at Riley. Why are you not involved in the other high schools?
Good question.
I had one other one.
Well, that goes along to say some of the stigmatism that goes with formerly incarcerated men and women, that, you know, no matter if you've done the time, you still have that label, that way in which you're viewed by society. So there are certain hurdles that some people are just not ready to overcome yet, but we are still trying to knock on that door, because the work that we've done has been very successful in every place that we're doing it. And if you're interested in becoming a mentor, participating in Take Heart, we are accepting applications, and you can check us out on takeheartinc.org. The application is online. Our history, what we do, is online. Check us out.
And my last question is, when you were talking about expungement, about doing away with records, I take it after you've been released from incarceration. Quick story is, I used to work with this guy, and he was a sex offender. Nobody knew it. He did terrible things to an exchange student, just terrible. He was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. He served 4. So why, when he gets released from prison, would you expunge a record like that to say he should be your next door neighbor? You know, we should forgive him for everything that he's done in the past, when some of his things that he did were just so heinous that if he did that to my daughter, I'd have killed him, and I wouldn't have flinched at all. I would have said, that's what you deserve. So why should we expunge a record for a person like that?
Yeah, Bob, that's a really good question and a tough situation. That record cannot be expunged. There's certain records, criminal convictions, that can never be expunged. Sex offenses is one, murder is another. You know, there's some things that will never, but you bring up a valid point, Bob. I don't know. It's a hard argument to present that you want justice and fairness for everybody, and how do we walk this biblical line that Christ wants us to also extend that, you know, to someone else. I don't have that answer. But it's those things that we have to ponder, I believe. Right? Greg? Keith. Yep. Yep. Thanks, Greg. We featured the Moreau College here. Michael is actually a graduate of MCI, is how we discovered that when he first spoke here. And then, yeah, Notre Dame has a prison education program. Adam, what did it start? Last year or 2 years ago? Indy Pep. Justin would be here, but he's downstate. I think Cam also. Yeah, so absolutely, we've got that happening here in town.
I don't really have a question, more of a comment. You know, as the University of Notre Dame students were sharing about the numbers in the state of Indiana, those may be very realistic and true compared to other states, but I wonder what they are in comparison to St. Joseph County. What's going on in this room, all the people and partners that are taking place to do restorative justice is like no other. As a man that came out of incarceration 1.5 years ago, the success I've been able to achieve has come from each and every person in this room doing things. From the city of South Bend to Notre Dame to Take a Heart to a graduate in the Bridges to Life program. I just thank this community, and I hope that other communities recognize what's going on in St. Joseph County and can extend it throughout our state.
Thank you, Alejandro. So how many counties are in Indiana? Is it 92 or 96? 92. I believe at one point St. Joseph County was the only county that did those expungement opportunities. So that's horrible percentage. So yeah, we're pioneers in a lot of ways for doing these efforts, and I agree that we are doing a lot of phenomenal work here in our county. A lot of people doing a lot of things on the street. Deb was a presenter here years ago. I'm sorry, Erwin, I forgot all about you.
I just want to say to everyone, you know, doing this work, it's not a job. It's not even a calling, it's where God puts you. But part of our responsibility is to want to find out our place in doing this work. Not all of us are going to be comfortable doing some of the stuff that needs to be done. But let me just say that I'm speaking as a South Bendian in case you don't know. I'm taking my space. We do this work. You may have heard of Center for Community Justice in Elkhart, Indiana. We just celebrated 45 years of our first victim offender reconciliation program. And one of my concerns as executive director is why we are not doing the bridging between the two counties. Doing the same work in Elkhart is completely different to what you've got here. Did you hear what I said? You're doing a completely different work. But I'm encouraged to know I could come here and sit and listen, because when Jeff and I met, how many years ago was it? 4 years ago. And I was like, this brother's really bitten off a lot. I'm not so sure I'm able to run with him, but he's continued the faith. And Keith, remember we met in Elkhart? You came to our humble offices, but it's not about me. It's about us. We have a purpose statement that says, creating safer communities by providing pathways to healing for those in need. I see that happening here, and I want to commend each and every one of you who's given your time, because this race is not for the swift. And we have to continuously pass the baton to the younger ones. Because you got the energy, we paid our part. So have a good one. Thank you much, Jeff, for inviting me.
Is David still here? Did everybody get a raffle ticket? We got to draw wherever that bucket is. If you don't have one, raise your hand. Yeah, Erwin and I met 4 years ago. He came and presented. Someone connected us. I went and met with him, invited him to speak at that event in 2020. And when we spoke the very first time on the phone, he challenged me. I told him we were thinking about doing some type of jail outreach or something. And he said, Jeff, make sure you count the costs, because this race is not given to the swift. That many people get involved and just as many quit, because it's hard. It's a hard space. You're working with men and women who have struggles and hurdles and all these things against them. And then we have a system that doesn't make it any easier. So we're kind of like caught in the middle of this push and pull, trying to help and support, but then you have a system that doesn't help us to help and support. So anyway, thank you, everybody. We're going to do some raffles real quick. And I got a couple of Kristen, can we do the announcements now while they're doing raffle tickets? A couple of things that are coming up. On the back of your program, there's a QR code. If you would, please, 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 please take that survey. I wish I had said it before a few people left. But please take that survey. We want your feedback. This will just help us as we do this event, as we gather, as we organize, as we invite people to come. As we continue in this space, your feedback is extremely helpful. So it should be a QR code on the back of your program, and then there's one up there on the screen as well. And then on Friday, March 22nd, I don't have the time, so I have to look, 9:30 to 12:30. So we have been involved. This will be our third time with a reentry simulation. Erwin, again, introduced that to me the very first time when we met, and we were going to try to collaborate and bring one here, and COVID shut that down. And so those sponsors that you see on the bottom of that flyer, this will be our third time at the St. Joe County Public Library. You can not do a QR code because it's not on that flyer. I'll have to share that. And you can sign up to be a volunteer, or you can attend the event as a participant. So it's life-changing. Many people in this room have done it, and it's a life-changing experience for those who, you get to kind of walk the walk of those who are formerly incarcerated and kind of experience a day in the life, if you will, on some of their challenges. So I think that's it. Does everybody have a raffle ticket? Okay. All right. Where are the tickets? Oh, David, okay. Can we come and we'll pull and get this done, and then we can send everybody home. Yep. Thank you. Give David a hand. Okay. I'll pull, and then David's gonna hand out those books. So the first one is 542178. 542178. Going once, going twice. Okay, on to the next one. 542118. Stephanie, she's opening the library for us. Oh, and is that okay? That's no, that's good. Oh no, I trust you, Stephanie. It's actually these two, I think, have this guy is coming. So Dame, so there's a paper in here. Okay, we'll save those to the end. Okay. 542123. 542123. Oh, we got a winner in the sound booth. I promise it wasn't fixed. Either one he can have. He can pick. 542154. 542154. Greg. And then these last two, I'll go ahead and put a plug in. This Poverty by America is the name of the book. And this gentleman's going to be at Notre Dame on Thursday, February 8th to talk. Matthew Desmond is his name, so he's going to be talking about this book. Can you put that back in there for me? And while I'm at it, Anna Haskins, I don't think she's here today, but she actually provided these books to be given away. So just very thankful for her. She works at the university. And the last two numbers, 542150. Okay. 542108. Yes, and there's information about that event in there if you want. Okay, last one, 542095. Oh, come on. Congratulations. Okay, y'all, a little housekeeping things. Feel free to stick around, speak to our guests. Keith and Misty, Blake, Delilah, who else spoke? Michael and Ellen. Thank you so much, guys, for being here. Oh, I do have a lot of acknowledgements. Jess Lyons, Reed Lyons, Sarah Inc., Kristen Hubble, Luke Krisman, Marcy Gates, Costco, and Martin Supermarkets. And again, all our speakers and guests, everybody contributed to make this happen today. So thank you very much. And before you go, once we're done, if you would, just stack your chairs for us, and we'll get those picked up. But Carl is going to make an appeal, and then he's going to close for us.
Thank you, Jeff. My name is Carl Hetler. I'm a United Methodist pastor here in South Bend and also the city's homelessness coordinator. One other event that we have coming up, because my slice is housing, is this Tuesday night at LaSalle Academy at 6 p.m. We're going to have a public hearing as we talk about housing first. as a way to think about restorative justice for those who have experienced trauma in childhood, need help in finding housing. We have the opportunity to build another center, but we also want to, as we talk about restorative justice, hear from the community. It's a chance to hear concerns, hear questions people have, to be able to answer those also. So I invite you to come out this Tuesday, 6 p.m. at LaSalle Academy, the chance to hear from myself, from the mayor, from Community Investment about our plans, and to hear your questions and concerns also this Tuesday at 6 p.m. You've heard a lot of things today, and for those of you, especially if this is your first time, maybe you're taking away something you've learned, and you can fill that out on your QR code on that survey response. But also, we want you to think about what actions you may be wanting to take in response to this. You've heard a lot of great organizations, from Take Heart to the Collaborative Hub. There's a lot of great agencies that you could get connected with if you want to serve and learn more about some of these restorative justice issues. We encourage you to Google or talk to them afterwards to get connected with these agencies. They're doing great work in our community. But also, we've talked about the importance of relationships. It's not just about the work that we do, but it's getting to know the people who are involved. I know that Riverside Church goes out regularly to Ducombe Center to volunteer there and get to know people there. I just heard about St. Pius bringing in guests from Reentry Center to their worship services. There's lots of different ways we can connect as individuals to get to know people, to give them encouragement, help them in reintegrating in society, helping them be able to find a job. And then thirdly, we want to encourage you, as many of our agencies talked about, to pursue advocacy. With different legislation that will come up on issues like the student policy team talked about for expungement, there's opportunities we'll have to advocate for legislation that comes up in future sessions. But even thinking about opportunities, working with Alex and Elite Cleaning, I advocate for my employer and for my apartment complex to employ him because of the great work that he does. What are opportunities that you have in your community, in your workplace, to advocate for those who need an opportunity, need a chance to reintegrate in society? Consider those opportunities that you have together. As we close, I invite you to stand, and if you feel comfortable, to hold hands with another. Otherwise, Jeff and I will model elbows up here. Jeff, come on up here with me. So whether you're holding hands or linking elbows, I invite you to respond and repeat after me. We seek peace. We seek justice. We will practice peace. We will practice justice. We go in peace and justice. Amen. Go in peace.